I was 19, just a regular guy from a small town in Ohio when something happened that I still think about years later. It wasn't a big moment. Not like in the movies where everything's dramatic and loud with music swelling in the background. It was quiet, subtle, but it hit me hard, like a punch you didn't see coming. My friend's stepmom, Emily, closed the door to the kitchen one summer afternoon, turned to me with this soft, almost knowing smile and said, "You always notice me, don't you?" Those words, the way she said them, the way her eyes held mine for just a second too long. They stuck with me like a song you can't stop humming, no matter how hard you try to shake it. Let me take you back to set the scene. Not that it's some grand story, but it's the only way to explain how this moment crept up on me. I grew up in a place where everybody knew everybody's business. The kind of town where you couldn't sneeze without someone down the street asking if you were coming down with a cold. My best friend Jake lived 2 streets over in a brick house with a sagging front porch. We've been tight since we were kids, riding bikes in the cul-de-sac, act until the street lights flickered on, racing each other to see who could skid the farthest without wiping out. Those were the days when life felt simple, when the biggest worry was whether we'd get caught sneaking snacks from Jake's mom's pantry. But by the time we hit high school, things started to shift. Jake's parents split up and his dad, Tom, remarried a woman named Emily. Emily was different from anyone I'd met in our little town. She wasn't loud or showy like some of the moms who'd volunteer at school events, always trying to outdo each other with their casseroles or PDA speeches. Emily was quiet, but not in a shy way. More like she didn't need to make a fuss to be noticed. She was in her late 30s, maybe early 40s. With dark hair she always wore loose, falling just past her shoulders, and these green eyes that seemed to catch every little detail. She had this way about her, confident, warm, like she could make you feel seen without even trying. When she walked into a room, it was like the air shifted, like she carried this quiet energy that made you want to pay attention. Jake didn't talk about her much, just called her Em and shrugged if I ever brought her up. To him, she was just his stepmom, the person who made sure there was dinner on the table and nagged him about taking out the trash. I didn't really notice Emily at first. She was just part of the background of Jake's house, like the creaky stairs or the old couch in the living room. But that changed the summer after my freshman year of college. I was back home working part-time at the hardware store on Main Street, stocking shelves and helping old guys find the right size nails for their weekend projects. Most of my free time was spent at Jake's place, same as always. His house was like a second home to me. We'd spend hours in the basement playing video games, shouting at each other over virtual battles, or we'd fire up the grill in the backyard, making burgers that were always a little too charred. Sometimes we'd just sit on the porch sipping cheap soda and talking about nothing. Girls' college, what we do when we finally got out of this town. Emily was always around, not in an intrusive way, but just there. She'd pop out with a tray of lemonade when we were sweating in the yard, or she'd ask how my classes were going while she stirred something on the stove. It was normal stuff, nothing that should have stood out, but I started picking up on little things. The way she'd laugh at my dumb jokes, even when Jake rolled his eyes and told me to shut up. The way she'd brush her hair behind her ear when she talked to me, her fingers lingering on the strand for just a moment. The way she'd ask me questions about school, about my job, about what I thought of the new coffee shop down, like she actually cared about what I had to say. It wasn't like she was flirting. Not exactly. But there was something in the way she looked at me that made my stomach twist in a way I didn't quite understand. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. I wasn't some weirdo obsessing over my friend's stepmom. I had a girlfriend. My first semester of college. A girl named Lauren, who was nice, but always seemed more interested in her phone than in me. We broke up before I came home for the summer, and I wasn't exactly looking for anything. But Emily, she was hard to ignore. She had this presence, this quiet pull that made you want to be around her. Like one time I was helping Jake fix his car in the garage. It was this old beater he'd bought off Craigslist, and we were elbow deep in grease trying to figure out why it kept stalling. Emily came out with a tray of sandwiches. Nothing fancy, just ham and cheese on white bread. She handed me one first, her fingers brushing mine for half a second, and she smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just enough to make me feel like I was the only person in the room. Jake didn't notice. He was too busy cursing at the engine, his hands covered in oil. But I noticed her. That summer, I started finding excuses to be at Jake's house more often. I'd offer to help with yard work, mowing their lawn, or trimming the overgrown bushes by the driveway. I'd volunteered to fix things around the house, a leaky faucet, a squeaky door hinge, stuff I'd learned from watching my dad tinker around our place. Tom, Jake's dad, was always working late at his accounting job. So it was usually just Jake, Emily, and me. I'd catch myself watching her sometimes, not in a creepy way, but just noticing the way she moved around the kitchen, chopping vegetables with this steady rhythm. The way she'd hum to herself while washing dishes, some old song I didn't recognize. I wasn't proud of it, but I couldn't help it. She was different from the girls my age who were always posting selfies or talking about the next big party. Emily was real grounded, like she'd lived enough to know who she was and didn't need to prove it to anyone. One day, I was at their house helping Jake move some old furniture out of the garage. It was one of those sticky Ohio summer days where the air felt thick and your shirt clung to your back like a second skin. We were hauling out an old dresser, sweating and swearing as we tried not to drop it on our feet. Emily came out with a pitcher of iced tea and 3 glasses, condensation dripping down the sides. She poured one for me first, her eyes meeting mine as she handed it over. "You're working hard out here, Ethan," she said, her voice light but warm like she meant it. Jake grabbed his glass and chugged it without a word, already turning back to the dresser. I thanked her and she lingered for a moment, leaning against the garage door frame, watching us before heading back inside. Jake didn't notice, but I did. That was the thing. She always made me feel like she saw me, not just as Jake's friend, but as me. It wasn't like anything was happening. Not really. It was just these moments, these little glances and smiles that started piling up in my head. I tell myself I was imagining it, that I was reading too much into things. Emily was married to Tom. She was Jake's stepmom. There was no way she was thinking about me the way I was starting to think about her. But then there were times when I wasn't so sure. Like one evening when I stayed late at their house after Jake and I watched a basketball game. Jake had passed out on the couch, snoring loud enough to wake the neighbors. I was about to grab my keys and head out when Emily called me into the kitchen. She was wiping down the counter, her hair falling over one shoulder, catching the light from the overhead lamp. "You don't have to rush off," she said, not looking at me, her hands still moving over the counter. "Want some coffee?" I said, "Sure," even though it was almost 10 p.m. and I didn't need the caffeine. She poured me a mug, the steam curling up in the quiet kitchen, and we sat at the table talking about nothing important. My job at the hardware store, her old job as a nurse before she quit to take care of the house. It was normal, the kind of conversation you'd have with anyone, but it didn't feel normal. The air felt heavy, like there was something unsaid hanging between us. She asked me about college, about what I wanted to do with my life. I told her I was studying engineering but wasn't sure if it was for me, that sometimes I felt like I was just going through the motions. She listened, really listened, her eyes locked on mine, like she was trying to figure me out. "You're smart, Ethan," she said, her voice soft, "but sure, you'll figure it out. You've got time." There was something in her tone, something that made my chest tight, like she saw something in me I didn't see in myself. I mumbled a thank you and took a sip of coffee, trying to act normal. She smiled like she knew I was nervous and didn't push it. Things kept going like that for weeks. Little moments, little conversations that felt like they meant more than they should. I'd catch her looking at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention, her eyes lingering just a second too long. I'd notice how she'd stand a little closer when we talked, her shoulder brushing mine when she passed me a plate or a glass. Once when I was leaving, her hand rested on my arm for a moment as she said goodbye, her fingers warm against my skin. I told myself it was nothing, that I was being an idiot, that I was seeing what I wanted to see. But I started feeling things I hadn't felt before. Not just attraction, but something deeper. Something that scared me because it felt so real, so undeniable. I started questioning myself. Was I crazy? Was I making this up? I'd lie awake at night staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, replaying every interaction, trying to figure out if I was imagining the way she looked at me, the way her voice softened when she said my name. I'd tell myself to stop, to get a grip, to focus on something else. But then I'd go back to Jake's house, and there she'd be smiling at me, asking me how my day was, and it would all start again. I didn't know what to do with it. This feeling that was growing in me. This thing I couldn't name but couldn't ignore. Then came that day, the day she said those words. It was a Saturday and Jake and I were hanging out at his place, sprawled on the couch, half watching some action movie on TV. Tom was out of town for work, some conference in Chicago, and the house felt quieter without him. Jake's phone buzzed, and it was his girlfriend Sarah asking him to come over to her place. He grabbed his keys, said he'd be back in a couple of hours, and told me to make myself at home. I was about to leave, too, figuring I'd head back to my place and maybe catch up on some sleep. But Emily was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner. The knife made the steady rhythmic sound against the cutting board, and I could smell garlic and onions in the air. "You don't have to go," she said, glancing over her shoulder, her hair catching the light. "Keep me company while I cook." Her tone was casual, like it was no big deal. But there was something in it that made me stay, something that made my heart beat a little faster. I sat at the counter, my elbows resting on the cool surface, watching her work. We talked about random stuff, move we'd seen, music we liked, the new restaurant that opened downtown, and how it was probably overpriced. It was easy, comfortable, the kind of conversation you could fall into without thinking. But there was this undercurrent, this tension I couldn't quite pin down, like we were both waiting for something to happen. She asked me to grab a bowl from the cabinet behind her, and I stood up, reaching over her shoulder to get it. When I handed it to her, our hands touched just like that day in the garage. But this time, she didn't pull away right away. Her fingers stayed on mine for a second, maybe two, and I felt my heart pound so hard I thought she might hear it. She turned to face me, the knife still in her other hand, her body close enough that I could smell the faint scent of her perfume, something soft and floral. That's when she closed the door. Not hard, not like she was mad or trying to make a point, just gently, like she didn't want anyone to hear what came next. She looked at me, her eyes steady, but soft, like she was seeing right through me, and said, "You always notice me, don't you?" It wasn't a question that needed an answer. It was like she already knew, like she'd seen the way I looked at her, the way I'd been paying attention all summer. My mouth went dry and I didn't know what to say. I just nodded barely, my throat too tight to form words. She smiled. Not a big smile, but one that felt like it was just for me, like it was a secret we were sharing. For a moment we just stood there, the kitchen quiet, except for the hum of the fridge and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I thought she might say something else, or maybe I was supposed to, but neither of us did. The moment stretched out, heavy and fragile, like it could break if either of us moved. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what she meant, what I was supposed to do, what this was. Was she just teasing me? Was it a test? Or was it something else? Something I didn't even want to name because it felt too big, too complicated, too wrong. Before I could figure it out, she turned back to the counter and started chopping again, like nothing had happened. "Dinner's almost ready," she said, her voice light again, like we'd been talking about the weather. But something had happened. I felt it, and I knew she did too. I didn't stay for dinner. I mumbled some excuse about needing to get home, grabbed my keys, and left before Jake got back. The whole walk home, my head was spinning. I kept replaying her words. The way she looked at me, the way she closed that door. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Like she'd been noticing me, too. Like I wasn't the only one who felt that pull. I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know how to feel about it. Part of me wanted to go back to ask her what she meant, to see if there was more to it. But another part of me, the part that wasn't an idiot, knew I couldn't. She was Jake's stepmom. She was married to Tom. Whatever this was, it wasn't something I could act on. After that day, things changed, but not in the way you might expect. Nothing happened. Not like that. I still went to Jake's house, still hung out with him, still played video games and grilled burgers and acted like everything was normal. But I was careful around Emily. I didn't avoid her exactly, but I didn't seek her out either. I keep our conversation short, polite, nothing too personal. She didn't bring it up again, didn't act any different, but I could feel it. The weight of that moment's still there, like a secret we both carried. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me, her eyes lingering for a second, and I'd wonder if she was thinking about it, too. But we never talked about it. Maybe it was better that way. Maybe it was the only way. Jake never noticed anything. He was too wrapped up in his own life, his girlfriend Sarah, who he was getting serious with, his job at the auto shop, his plans to move to Columbus after the summer. Tom was still working long hours, coming home late and leaving early, barely around enough to notice what was going on in his own house. And Emily was still Emily, warm, kind, always asking me how I was doing, always making me feel like I mattered. But that one moment in the kitchen, those words she said, they changed how I saw her, how I saw myself. I wasn't just Jake's friend anymore. I was someone she noticed, someone she saw, someone who'd shared a moment with her that I couldn't explain but couldn't forget. The rest of that summer passed in a blur. I went back to college in the fall, threw myself into my classes, tried to focus on engineering and late-night study sessions and the new friends I was making. I dated a couple of girls. Nothing serious, but enough to keep my mind busy. But every now and then when I was alone, I'd think about Emily. I'd think about that kitchen, that door closing, those words. I'd wonder what would have happened if I'd said something. If I'd stayed for dinner, if I'd pushed it further. But I didn't, and I'm glad I didn't. It wasn't just about her being married or being Jake's stepmom. It was about me, about knowing that whatever I felt, it wasn't something I was ready to handle. Years later, I still think about it. I'm older now, 26, living in a different city, Cleveland, if you're curious, with a job as an engineer that I ended up sticking with, even though I still don't love it. I've got a small apartment, a couple of friends I grab beers with on weekends, a life that's mine. Jake and I don't talk as much anymore, just a text here and there, maybe a call around the holidays. He moved to Columbus like he planned, got engaged to Sarah, and last I heard, he's working as a mechanic. Tom and Emily got divorced a couple of years ago from what Jake told me. He didn't say much, just that it wasn't messy, that they'd grown apart. Emily moved out west somewhere, maybe California or Oregon, and I don't know what she's doing now. I hope she's happy. I hope she's still that same person who could make you feel like you were the only one in the room who could say something simple and make it feel like it meant everything. I don't know what that moment in the kitchen meant. Not really. Maybe it was nothing, just a fleeting thing that felt bigger than it was because I was young and didn't know any better. Maybe it was something more. Something neither of us was ready to face. Something that could have changed everything if we'd let it. But I know this. It was real. It wasn't a dream or a story I made up to make my life sound more interesting. It was just a moment. One that happened in a quiet kitchen on a hot summer day when Emily closed the door gently and said those words that I'll never forget. I don't know if she meant them the way I heard them or if I'll ever know what she was really thinking. But for that one moment, I felt seen, and that was enough to carry with me even now all these years later. Sometimes I wonder if I should have said something, if I should have asked her what she meant, if I should have stayed and seen where it went. But then I think about Jake, about Tom, about the life I've built since then. And I know I made the right choice. It wasn't about acting on it. It was about living with it, about carrying that moment without letting it define me. I don't talk about it with anyone, not even Jake. It's not something you can explain, not without it sounding wrong or complicated. But every now and then, when I'm driving home from work or sitting on my couch with a beer, I'll think about her. I'll think about that summer, that kitchen, that smile.